There is, in the heart of England, a place of peace and solitude, which has, for those who know it, a deeper meaning than mere beauty or grandeur. People who live here love it as their home, but more than that, people from miles away have a deep and abiding passion for the place. It's a populated place, no lonely Garden of Eden. In Derby, its cathedral city, the tall and ancient tower speaks of a long and prosperous past, though the grand church of Our Lady and All Saints in Chesterfield is famous for a miscalculation on the part of its builders. A Georgian crescent at Buxton, a castle on a hill at Bolsover, breathtaking scenery, and an eccentric castle at Ryber. Britain's first national park is here. The clues add up to a place which people turn to for inspiration and recreation, the Derbyshire Dales. Why do people come here? Some of the reasons are historical. These rolling hills are a very healthy place to be. Like Bath and Cheltenham, Matlock Bath is a spa town. In 1852, John Smedley built a hydropathic centre in Matlock. It was he who built the ruined castle at Ryber a few years later. The pleasure grounds survive, and with them, another development, which Smedley would have approved. It's the first cable car system in England, climbing above a hillside which was once a lead mining area, and later landscaped into gardens. The summit, the Heights of Abraham, is named after the place where General Wolfe fought his famous battle in 1759. It's been a pleasure garden for 200 years. The view from the top over the Derwent Valley is unchanged since then. The facilities on offer are a modern version of the original purpose of recreation and relaxation. Great Rutland Cavern provides an exciting glimpse of lead mining days. It's been a showpiece since 1810. The town of Matlock Bath developed alongside the pleasure grounds, but this has been a mining area since the Romans first found lead ore on the hillside. Today, it's dedicated to leisurely exploration, with a mining museum and information centre in the pavilion, as well as more theatrical entertainment. Lead and mineral springs are two things which brought people to the Derbyshire Dales. Another was water power. Cordwell's mill at Roseley still runs as ever it did, grinding flour for sale locally, using only the power of the river. Like lead mining, water power is a thing of the past, intriguing but no longer economically important. Towns like Wirksworth, once the lead mining capital of the area, must find another way to live. Wirksworth is a quarrying town now, but it's something else too. It's beautifully preserved, an award-winning example of what can be done with historic buildings in a dramatic setting. A country club on the outskirts of Wirksworth brings visitors to enjoy not only the town, but the countryside round it. Tourism is replacing mining as a source of income for the community. Another important activity in the old days was the development of communications. Here at Cromford, Sir Richard Arkwright conceived the ideas which were to lead to the Industrial Revolution, and he needed transport from his mills to the sea. His solution was the Cromford Canal. Canals in hilly districts have water problems, solved here in the grand manner by installing a monstrous pumping engine at Leeward. It lay idle and derelict for 40 years, until a group of enthusiasts decided to restore it in 1971. The work took 8 years, but now the engine runs as smoothly as it ever did. The 33-foot beam can lift 4 tons of water 7 times a minute, feeding the canal from the River Derwent. And now the canal is open once more, cleared by the same group of dedicated people. The boat carries visitors along a scenically beautiful and historic route, part of Britain's industrial heritage. It's not as powerful as the beam engine, just 1 horsepower. Not so much historic as nostalgic is another form of transport preserved at Cryche, at the Tramway Museum. To the children, it's tangible and audible proof that Grandad's stories are true after all. Trams have been replaced by buses, and railways too have gone the same way. But they haven't disappeared completely. At Hartington, the signal box is not only an information point for the Peak National Park, it's a departure point for an imaginative new use for railways. The tracks have gone, but the rail bed remains, and the result is 2 gently graded trackways called the Tissington Trail and the High Peak Trail, perfect for cycling or walking. The traffic in commercial freight has stopped, but being traffic-free, the trails are ideal for their new purpose. The trails are safe and easy, and they're also surrounded by historical and geological interest. People visiting the park are well advised to pay attention to the park rangers, with their wealth of information about the sites along the way. The viaducts are reminders of the railway age, spanning valleys whose beauty sums up all the glories of the Dales. Round here are several sites of special scientific interest, but you don't have to be a scientist to appreciate what's special about the place. Imagine yourself a mill worker from the grimy new cities of the Industrial Revolution earlier this century, and imagine knowing that all this was here, waiting for your rare and longed-for holidays. You'll begin to understand the affection of local people for the Derbyshire Dales. Bakewell has been known since Saxon times for its iron-rich springs. The Saxons called it Baedeker's Well. By all means sample a Bakewell tart in Bakewell itself, but do get the name right. Here you must call it a pudding. But the information centre will put you right on things like that, as well as the rest of Bakewell's fascinating story. The church, with its octagonal tower, contains the bones of Sir John Vernon, a rumbustious figure from the 16th century. The rest of Bakewell is ancient and peaceful, with some of the finest gardens in Derbyshire. Another special attraction, not only for visitors but for local people, is Bakewell Monday Market, a weekly event since 1330. It's not just the buying and selling which brings people here, but the social occasion. The cattle market is more of a business affair, but it too is a social gathering. This is farming country, and it's walking country. The two come together in a typically practical Derbyshire idea, the camping barn. It's not luxurious, but it's dry and it's cheap, and it saves carrying a tent around. It has also given a new lease of life to a number of otherwise redundant old barns. For travellers for whom an empty barn doesn't seem quite home from home, there's the farm holiday scheme. Quite an experience for someone brought up in a modern city, and an apt continuation of the district's role as a haven for townspeople. The farmers in the Dales are happy to pass on their own love of the countryside to appreciative visitors. Red House Stables is famous for more than its pony treks round the Dales. At Darley-Dale, they not only carry out all their own repairs in the smithy, but they keep a fleet of antique horse-drawn vehicles for hire or for joyrides. Many a local wedding has been graced by one of these splendid conveyances. But best of all is the chance of a real coach trip. The Gay Gordon was used regularly on the London to Edinburgh run 150 years ago. Now its destination is Chatsworth. Chatsworth is Chatsworth. There's nowhere quite like it, anywhere. Its grounds were laid out by Capability Brown, with rolling parklands and woods and views across the surrounding countryside. The moving thing about old Capability's enterprises is that he can have seen only in his mind's eye what they would look like in maturity. Their present beauty is a product of his long-term imagination. The geometry of the maze and the engineering of the fountains, they're fed from a lake behind the house, are details of a grand overall design in the formal gardens. The house itself grew from small beginnings in 1552, but most of what we see today is the work of the first Duke of Devonshire in the late 17th century. The same family has lived here since the first house was built. The painted hall, with scenes from the life of Julius Caesar, was finished in 1694. The oak room contains panelling imported from a German monastery, but the chapel was built here on the spot at the end of the 17th century. Most of the house is of the same period, and most of it is unchanged. The library is part of another burst of building in 1830, but the ceiling is the original from the first Duke's design in the 17th century. Another product of the 1830s expansion was the great dining room finished in 1832. The first dinner given here was for Princess Victoria, then 13 years old. It was the first time in her life that she'd been allowed to eat with the grown-ups. The sixth Duke said that the curved ceiling made him feel as if he was eating in a great trunk. The sculpture gallery is a great treasure chest of 19th century art. Among the Italian marbles stands a very local product. The Chatsworth Tarza is the largest ornamental vase ever made from the unique stone called Derbyshire Blue John. It's been known for centuries. There are Blue John vases in the ruins of Pompeii. The Derbyshire Dales are the only place in the world where it's found. Working the stone is a great art requiring patience above all else. In its original state, in the mine below, it has a different kind of beauty. Signs of the old miners are still to be seen in the caverns, but what draws the intrepid visitor is the beauty and colour of the caverns themselves. A visit to Castleton has become an essential part of a tour of the Dales. Strange when you think that most of the other attractions are in the open air. A combination of rain, acid peaty soil and limestone has produced a honeycomb of caves beneath the hills, ornamented with stalactites and stalagmites in petrified cascades. The largest entrance is to Peak Cavern, where a little community of people used to make ropes for a living. They say that Winnot's Pass was once a huge cave system, until its roof fell in a few million years ago, after the water had dried up. Water has been added to the landscape more recently at Ladybar Dam in the upper Derwent Valley. Artificial or not, the new lake has its own beauty, and it's a mecca for fishermen. For every fish taken out, another must be put in. Ladybar Trout Farm exists for just that purpose. The Severn Trent Water Authority releases tens of thousands of fish into the reservoir every year to maintain the stocks. Further down the river, below the reservoir, great steps of gritstone form scarp edges looking down into the Derwent Valley. It's just the place for another traditional pastime of Dale's people and their visitors from the industrial cities: hill walking. These vast open spaces were the antidote to claustrophobic factory work and terraced housing in the cities. The edges provided the setting for a new sport at the end of the last century: rock climbing. Like hill walking, it provides a means of stretching city-bound limbs and testing oneself against nature. And it's a principal attraction in the national park today. In fact, there are dozens of ways in which the people of the neighbouring cities can immerse themselves in this glorious landscape. Some choose to camp, while others live in more solid surroundings, as they gather to study at Loosehill Hall. It's the study centre of the Peak National Park, where appreciation of the scenery is enhanced by learning how it was formed and what lives in it. Trips from the study centre take in all 76 square miles of the park, as well as covering local crafts like spinning, weaving, or even dry stone walling. Naturally, landscape drawing and photography are very popular courses. The village of Eyam is more than a place for tourists. It's a place of pilgrimage in memory of the great sacrifice of the villagers in 1665, when they shut themselves off from the world to prevent the plague spreading outside the village. 250 of them died, but the disease didn't spread. Today, their descendants give thanks not for survival, but for water in the unique Derbyshire custom of well dressing. The pictures are made from flower petals and seeds on traditional biblical themes, and the custom is seen in about a dozen Dales villages during the year. Haddon Hall was already ancient when Eyam made its great sacrifice. It's a medieval house, once the home of Sir George Vernon, King of the Peak, who's buried at Bakewell. The banqueting hall looks now as it did when it was built in 1370. Together with the rest of the house, it has been restored to life after lying untenanted for 200 years until 1925. In the chapel, they found 15th century wall paintings under layers of whitewash. In one of them, St. Christopher carries the infant Christ, a little faded, but as lively as the day he was drawn. A few miles to the south, in Winster Village, the ancient market hall is preserved by the National Trust. They use it as an information centre. Each of the towns and villages has its own character, yet each is part of the whole. Matlock's 15th century church is hung inside with paper garlands in memory of town girls who died before marriage. But it's not all history and tourists. The reservoir nearby is a centre for people who come just to sail, or to watch others sailing. The open air is what draws people from the cities to the Derbyshire Dales. The Youth Hosteling Association has no fewer than 26 hostels in the area. None grander than Hartington Hall. Bonnie Prince Charlie is said to have stayed here, but that was some time before the YHA was founded. Most of the hostels are rather less imposing. Whether you sleep in a stately home or eat in the open air, or both in the case of Hartington, the Dales themselves are an endless supply of spiritual energy. Tissington, gathered round its green, is the perfect English village. It ought to be. It was built all of a piece as a model village by the Fitzherberts, who still live in the Tudor Hall. Among people who have drawn their inspiration from the Dales, Lord Byron considered that there are things in Derbyshire as noble as in Greece or Switzerland. Daniel Defoe, on the other hand, called part of the Peak the most desolate, wild and abandoned country in all England. But he wasn't talking about Beresford Dale. Little caves, or gaping caverns, green hills, and above all running water, are powerful ingredients of human contentment. The most famous of all the Dales combines all three and more. Places of such beauty are precious and must be protected. The National Trust has taken under its wing not only Dovedale, but Ilham Hall and its grounds, and Sudbury Hall, a beautiful house from the reign of Charles II. The Museum of Childhood is a unique collection of toys and games going back 200 years. In the south of the Dales, brick replaces stone as the material for building. Osmaston is a 19th century garden village, as is its neighbour, Snelston, built between 1826 and 1840. Somewhat less planning, or a little more stubbornness, seems to have gone into one building in Bradley known as the Hole in the Wall. Norbury's beautiful little church with the Fitzherbert tombs, or Ashbourne's stately spire in the finest Georgian town in Derbyshire. Each of the historic towns and villages in the Derbyshire Dales would repay a lifetime study. Around them all, spreading like a blessed garden among the industrial cities, lie these Dales. For history, sheer scenic grandeur, and their brilliantly varied mosaic of character and colour, they have no equal anywhere in Britain. No wonder people come here to explore or to study, or just to inhale the peace and freedom of their beloved Derbyshire Dales.